Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I have a very special episode for you today because last night I had a great conversation with Bill Kelly from the Bill Kelly podcast. We've been trying to get a call together for quite a while now, but with my move overseas, things kind of had to be pushed back a little bit. So that's on me. We talked about all things cross border, from situations at the border to detainments to the new social media proposal, and even what things might look like after Trump is gone. I'll be honest, I was a little bit nervous going into it, but Bill and Madeline are great hosts. So you're definitely going to want to get a coffee or tea for this one. Pause here if you need to. I also want to thank Bill and Madeline for having me on their show, and I really do hope we can do this again in the future. I also truly appreciated the offline discussion we had after, and the great advice that you gave me. Getting advice from a seasoned veteran like yourself, especially as a new YouTube creator with a loud cat, it means a lot to me, Bill. Our call was just around the 1 hour mark, but for me, it only felt like 15 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed the discussion we had on all things Canada. Today's backdrop comes from Tracy, who took this photo from my hometown in Vancouver, at Locarno Beach. I'm very familiar with this beach, as well as Jericho and Spanish Banks. Tracy, thank you so much for sending this over. It means a lot to see the photos from home these days. Before we start, if you haven't subscribed to the Bill Kelly podcast yet, please head over to his channel and give him a subscribe. You can tell him Guard the Leaf sent you. I'm going to try not to interrupt too much, but there's just a few points on my side that I missed during the call, and I wanted to clarify. Hope you enjoyed the discussion, everyone.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. I got to tell you right up front, I've been looking forward to this discussion that we're about to have on the podcast for quite some time. One of my favorite podcasts, and we've talked about this on the show a number of times, that there are some that you kind of go to places, to try to get some insight as to what's going on. But our next guest, somebody who I've been reading and listening to for the last little while because I love the insights, and it follows right into what we were talking about creating a dialogue and a discussion, an informed discussion about the things that are going on and how they impact our lives too. So it is a great pleasure for me to welcome to the program Guard the Leaf. GTL joins us on the Bill Kelly podcast to talk about a number of major issues here. GTL, great to have you. Thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Happy to be here.
I'm just talking about some of the issues that are going on, and we mentioned just before we started rolling here today that I know that you've been talking about Canada-U.S. relations and things that are going on in the border. Matter of fact, the last couple of weeks, you've kind of focused on some of these issues because there's a lot of it been in the news. The impact that what's happening here with tariffs and Canada's response to that, the impact it's having on tourism, and there's some new information about that over the last couple of weeks. But also, to put this in perspective, we know that we seem to be moving closer to some sort of a conversation between Canada and the U.S. about, trade deals and whether or not it's going to happen. So a lot of the issues that you've been talking about on your podcast for the last little while are all of a sudden on the front burner again. Things like tourism, things like border security, and a different kind of border. Between Canada and the U.S. We remember the days, of course, when we bragged about the fact that we have the longest undefended border in the world, Canada and the U.S., and we get along so fine that we can move freely back and forth between the border. And once in a while you have to show your driver's license or now a passport or something, but no big deal, right? It's a different world, and it's a changed world, especially when it comes to border crossings and the impact, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm old enough to remember that, I crossed into Bellingham with a driver's license, and it was funny. I mean, that was during my high school days. My friends and I crossed the border, and all we needed was our driver's license. And the border guard asked, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, we're just going to go to Bellis Fair." And that was all we needed. And it was a very easy process to get into the U.S. Now, obviously, 2025, it's different. I mean, I have an Nexus. It's going to be expiring pretty soon, and I'm going to let it expire. But obviously, everybody has a bit of a, how do I say it? A bit of a question in their head. Okay, am I going to be questioned at the border or not? Or is this going to be a difficult crossing or whatever else? I've always said on my channel, 9 out of 10 people, they'll probably cross into the US, no problem. But there's always going to be that one person or that, maybe somebody just might, they might say something that might trigger a secondary inspection, right? And I've even had people on my channel email me and tell me, hey, normally I go down every day, or not every day, but, at least once a week or something to see family. This time it was different. So it's definitely going to be trickier, I think, to go across. And that's just not at the land crossings, but also at the pre-clearances as well at the airports.
Yeah, we're going to talk about both issues because, well, you and I were both from areas that were very close to the American border. Growing up in Hamilton, where I was, of course, we're only half an hour away from the border for Buffalo and or Niagara Falls, New York, whatever the case might be. And you're right, there was easy access. And it's a Saturday, let's go over there, and we might go to a couple of bars, you might go to a baseball or hockey game or something like that, and what's the big deal? You're at the border for 30 seconds. Where are you going? Oh, yeah, well, have a great time at the game or whatever the case might be. But the level of work that goes into this right now and the way that the border security has increased, and whether it's justified or not, it's a new reality these days. And the questions that are being asked. And that's one thing to say, okay, we're crossing the border, in a vehicle, for instance. But you've also talked and had some interesting discussions with some people about, as you say, access points. I mean, to get on a plane and fly to wherever in the States, and you meet this. And one of the ones I wanted to ask you about here, because it was a fascinating show, I think it was only about 2 weeks ago that you did it, where you talked with a Mr. R, who you identified as Mr. R, who was, again, somebody who watches your show on a pretty consistent basis, but travels a lot. And he had a fascinating story about the sorts of things that he ran into, didn't he?
Mr. R was the one traveling to Arizona, right?
Yeah, well, he often went to Florida, but I think he was going to Arizona this particular trip. Yeah,
Yeah.
from
I
Toronto
think
initially.
the problem, one of the common things that, most of the people that I interview talk about is it's definitely different when it comes to the border. They frequent so much that when they cross into the US, sometimes they actually they told me offline that sometimes they actually see the same border guards. And if they're going into the US, they see the same border guards, before the Trump side. One actually told me that, I've seen the border guard many times, maybe a dozen times because I go down and visit. I don't know what the attitude is. I don't know why he's giving so much attitude now, right? So, I mean, it's not like the person has changed. It's just that the mentality and the attitude has really changed when he went across the border. So, I think for those snowbirds that are currently in the US right now, for me, like I've done a few snowbird videos lately, and I have one that's going to be published pretty soon. But there's actually a video that I think it was City News that they did an interview. But what is key to me is that these snowbirds that are still going down at the moment, what I think it's a 30-day. Bill, you might know better than me, but it's a 30-day form that they have to fill out if they're going to be if they're going to be there for more than 30
Yeah,
days.
yeah,
There was a report that I did where a snowbird couple filled out the form. They went to the CBP office, and the CBP officer said that, hey, you don't need this form. So to me, that's going to cause a lot of confusion, and that's going to cause some snowbirds probably to go to the US. And then, they're going to do their thing. They're going to come back into Canada probably in March or April, and they're going to find out that, hey, you didn't fill out this form. So what I'm trying to say is that, there's going to be a lot of miscommunication, confusion about this whole process. And when I was talking to R offline, I remember he was telling me, things are getting chaotic to a point where, this type of confusion is going to start coming up more. So after I heard that, and after I heard that report, I started thinking, okay, the snowbirds are going to go down. We can't stop them from doing that. But what's going to happen when they come back up? And if some of these snowbirds decided, oh, well, the CBP guard told me I didn't need it, they're going to go back into Canada and potentially have an issue if they get stopped at the border, right? Because obviously we know there are border stops just before you get to the Canadian side of the border. So those are things that I think we have to be mindful of those. What a border guard tells you might not be rule, 3-4 months down the road.
What do in those discussions though, G, when you have these discussions with people who, as you say, maybe have been doing this for years. I mean, I've known, and I'm sure you've known people, maybe retired people, where that's part of the protocol. In Southern Ontario, where I was raised, it was a trip down to Florida, and they'd go to a trailer park or someplace like that. Or, if it was out in the West Coast, maybe, they'd be heading out to Arizona or someplace like that. That was where they wintered, as you say, usually maybe January, February, maybe come back in March or April or something like that. No big deal. And yeah, you ask the usual questions and everything else. But the people I've talked to that some of them decided not to go anymore, say that they've run into this right now, and they're almost offended by the fact that, hey, what, you don't trust me anymore? I've been doing this for 10 years, and all of a sudden you've got to ask me these questions, and you're questioning, whether or not I've got some nefarious intent in going down there, and it's causing a lot of friction. It maybe not overtly, where you don't necessarily take it out on the guard. They're acting, as you say, the guard maybe a little more suspiciously than usual, and all of a sudden everybody's getting nervous, and it's not a very pleasant experience for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm a Nexus holder. And my wife and I used to go to Bellingham all the time, and personally, I used to recognize the border guards at the Nexus gate, and most of the time, I don't even, with the Nexus process, you drive up to the gate, you hold out your Nexus cards, and you basically hold it up for the scanner. You get to the gate, and then most of the time, the process is just like the person telling you where you're going. I just said Bellingham, and then he lets you go. But I haven't been to the U.S. since Trump came to the office, so I don't know, I haven't personally experienced what the new pressure is. But I have had friends that have gone to the U.S. This year, mainly because they booked trips. When did they book it? I think they booked it in October of last year. So everything was paid for, the flight was paid for, tickets were paid for, and it was just too much to give up just to not go. So unfortunately, they decided to stick it out and go. But from their experience, then this was at pre-clearance in Vancouver. Some of them had Nexus, and they basically were pulled into secondary. And they just told me that the experience was stressful because they were held, and they were held to a point where, they had 5 minutes to their departure of their flight. But it was also the attitude and the tone of the CBP guards' voices inside. They described it as being very hostile, meaning that, they were telling other people in the secondary, don't talk. You sit here, you sit there. Did I say you can talk, or whatever else, right? I don't know. Just for me, I would not want to be put in that situation. So, just to tell another story, I mean, I just mentioned this on my channel a little while ago, or in a video a couple days ago, I think. But back in 2016 or 2017 sometime, I was actually pulled into secondary, and I was going to San Francisco for a conference. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, I had showed my Nexus. I went through the Nexus line, and I was pulled into secondary. And I was only there for about 10, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And after, the guy gave me my passport, he says, you're good to go. I asked him, what was the reason I was pulled in? And they actually said, oh, we pulled you in because you have the same name as somebody that we're looking for. And I was like, oh, okay. And I'm like, same, even my middle name. And they're like, yeah, even your middle name's the same. And, they asked at the desk, do you have any other passports? And I said, no, I only have a Canadian one. But I guess they were looking for somebody else with the exact same name. And, obviously I'm not that person. But the point I'm trying to say is that only took about 10, 15 minutes, and they were actually very polite about it. If that were to happen now, I would be very afraid of what they would do and how long I would be there. And it's just an extra level of scrutiny at the moment that I wouldn't want to go through.
It's funny telling that story. I went through a very similar experience years and years ago. My wife and I were going down to Vegas, and we were flying out of Pearson in Toronto, of course. And I got the same thing. I got held up, and I thought, what do you mean? You're William Patrick Kelly and from Montreal. I said, no, I'm from Hamilton. He said, are you sure? Have you ever been to Montreal? Have you ever lived in Montreal? And I said, no. Well, we're looking for a William Patrick Kelly. Apparently, he had a number of offenses, being charged anyway. And, I guess they were just checking, but you're right. I mean, for that 2 or 3 minutes, I was pretty nervous, but they said, okay, move on. But that was then, this is now. That was like 10, 15 years ago. These days, You're right. I mean, I don't know how they would do this, but I guess what bothers me about this when I hear these stories, though, G, is right now, the thing I guess is, it seems to be all based on fear. Fear everybody. Don't trust anybody. And that's top. From the political side of things, from the White House right on down. Fear that group, fear this group, don't trust this group. And it never used to be that way. And I don't want it to fall into the place where we're naive about everything. But at the same time, you always have to be diligent. I understand that. But it just seems as if they've taken it to the nth level right now, and it's making everybody feel uneasy. And I don't know if it's making us feel any safer.
No, it's definitely not making us feel safer. And one of the things too I'm noticing as well is that it's not just the government level CBP, it's also the citizens too. Now, I'm not going to categorize all US. I mean, I've been very clear on my channel that I do appreciate my US viewers and our supporters, right? But what I find is that whatever the government is saying, whether it's CBP or whether it's even ICE, right? The the Trump supporters are really, putting fuel on the fire as well, right? And for me, I would not want, one of the reasons why I'm not going to the US obviously is because of the boycott and stuff, right? But it's also the fact that I personally do not want to support anybody that has voted for Trump or enabled everything that we're going through at the moment, right? I've mentioned on my channel as well is that I've always been kind of going through this internal battle. It's like, how do I boycott the US, but how do I support the US citizens that are, not Trump supporters and are, their businesses might be suffering, right? Unfortunately, there's no way around that. It's either you boycott or you don't. And for me, my values, I appreciate all my US viewers that support us, support Canada. But, what's funny actually came out of that is a lot of people emailing me or messaging in my comments saying the only thing that you can really do to support us is to continue your boycott. And there's nothing else really. But for those I support, but obviously those that are fanning the fire and, as you mentioned, really kind of escalating the rhetoric and stuff, those are the ones that I can't support.
But again, one of the shows you did recently, just a week or two ago, where you were talking to somebody who was talking to Americans in some of these border towns that are being negatively impacted. Let's face it, a lot of those towns, especially near the border, they are reliant upon Canadian tourism, especially in the summer months. But I mean, it could be all year long, depending on the town, and it's just not happening anymore. And what I was surprised about as I watched that podcast was the number of Americans that didn't understand why it was happening. They were blaming the weather or blaming any number of other things. And not one of them said, well, you know what, maybe it's what our president's doing or the way he's treating Canada. That didn't come up in the conversation. I don't know if they're oblivious.
To be honest.
Yeah, I don't know if they're oblivious to it or they just choose not to believe that sort of thing. They want to put it off as to something else. Some of them, of course, just are blaming Canadians and say, what's the matter with you people? But they don't seem to want to talk about the why, do they?
No, they don't. And I think that's what's actually infuriating a lot of Canadians, right? Because, we know the reason. But what we're finding is that a lot of US citizens, whether they're business owners or tourist officials or even government officials, they always blame it on the tariffs. They don't blame it on their government. They don't blame it on Trump, or they'll even blame it on the weather, right? And for me, I mean, this is just my opinion. Whenever I hear that, it kind of disrespects the reason why we're actually boycotting. And I guess I've been a bit more vocal on it, but it's really starting to kind of tick me off that, US citizens, they are trying to put their own reasoning on why we are boycotting, whereas they don't listen to what the actual reason is. And, I also have to play devil's advocate here that, they only know what they know. And if their media is telling them, hey, Canada is boycotting because of the tariffs, then that's what they're going to believe, right? And unless they're saying the media is heavily enforcing that it's the 51st state rhetoric, it's the disrespect, they're not going to know. But at the same time as well, I feel that there is a bit of ignorance when it comes to it that, it's definitely got to be the weather or, they're not coming down because of the exchange rate and that's what it is, right? So obviously we know it's not, but, I don't think there's a way to change that mentality down south.
A lot of this started, well, when Trump, of course, was sworn in again at the early part of this year. And of course, it wasn't too long after that he started the thing about tariffs and increasing tariffs, et cetera. But it was also when he started talking about Canada as the 51st state. At first, I thought a lot of us kind of stuck back and said, is he joking? I don't think so. But then it became more and more evident that it was becoming serious. And if you recall, that was just around the same time as the Four Nations hockey tournament that was going on, half of it in Canada, half of it in the States. And the reaction initially when all this stuff started was that the fans in Montreal, where a number of the games were being played, started to boo the American national anthem when the Americans were playing. And I think a lot of Americans got the wrong message from that. And it was almost like we had to say, no, it's not you, okay? It's your president. He's basically dissing our sovereignty and basically saying that all he wants is our resources. He just wants to suck us dry and he wants Canada and Greenland. If anybody said that about the states, these people would be up in arms. But they didn't seem to understand that Trump's actions and his words and his threats really
Hmm.
toward our sovereignty is infuriating. And
Yeah.
I know that we're the nice passive Canadians that, we just, oh, sorry, I offended you. But at some point you cross the line, and Trump crossed that line and we responded. And I don't know that they knew how to handle it.
No, they don't. I actually feel that a lot don't see anything wrong with it, right? Obviously, the Trump supporters don't see anything wrong with it, and they're encouraging it, right? I get a lot of emails from the right saying that, I can't wait to take over your country, right? So I've been hitting the block button a lot lately on my emails, but I can't speak for those. I mean, obviously you can't fix that side, right? But what I'm also noticing as well is that even um, you know, the U.S. citizens, there are some that they've told me that, I didn't vote for Trump. I don't agree with it, but I think you Canadians are taking this too seriously, or you're overreacting, right? And whenever I hear that, that that also upsets me as well, because yes, you may not be supporting Trump, you may not have voted for him, but you also still don't understand that saying that Canadians are overreacting or that we need to relax tells me that you don't truly understand what is going on here as well. I bring this up because in my very first interview with another person named R, this was back probably in, I think, July, maybe June. He was a Canadian that moved to the States for work. He's in the medical profession. He's actually moving back to Canada, I think this month actually. So I think he should be coming back to Canada soon. But what really kind of came out of that interview was that he told me that his close friends in the US who are not Trump supporters, don't agree with their current government. He was shocked how, I don't want to say the word oblivious, but he was shocked how they just really didn't care. They didn't care about what was going on in Canada or what their government was doing, even though they didn't vote for him. But it was just something like, oh, hey, your country's trying to take us over. And he's like, oh, okay, well, okay. And, there was no response to it, right? And there was no, I guess, what was he looking for? Like sympathy or like understanding of what Canadians are going through right now, right? So that kind of got me thinking. I know in our channels, if we have US viewers that support us, they understand. I feel now that the US citizens that support Canada is a very, very small group. The
And
average US citizen may not even know the impact of all of this that we're actually going through right now. So
But that's an age-old problem, though, isn't it? Americans, and I again, you're right. I don't like to make blanket statements about Americans. But I mean, we see this even if we're watching episodes. How many times on Jeopardy have they come up with a question about Canadian geography or something, and it stumps all the three of the because they don't know. They
yeah,
just don't pay attention. What's the capital of such and such? Saskatchewan, all these sorts of things. And we kind of laugh and say, well, those, they just don't care. And remember Rick Mercer years ago, I had a great series of shows talking to Americans where he went down and did on the street interviews and asked them questions about Canada. And of course, none of them had any answers to this. And it was funny, but it was also sad in a roundabout way. So that's one element of it. I guess we've kind of accepted that that's just the way things are. But when Trump takes it to the next level and says, we want you to become the 51st state. We want your minerals. We want your fresh water. That's becoming threatening all of a sudden. And I don't know that they understood the magnitude of exactly what that was. And it's not just an insult. It's a threat. And especially time and place. Let's look at what's going on in the world. Russia walks in one day and invades Ukraine. This taking over land and incursions and simply saying what you have, I want, and I'm simply going to take it right now is happening in other parts of the world. And I'm not suggesting that, the American troops are going to march over the border tomorrow. At the same token, it just seems as if all of a sudden that's not an impossibility. It's improbable, but at the same time, with Trump, you don't know what the next steps are going to be. I mean, how many of us could have predicted that he'd be firing, and blowing up gunboats in the South Pacific these days, or the South Atlantic? But that's what he's doing. So we feel threatened in a roundabout way. And of course, when you feel threatened, when you feel backed into a corner, it's human nature to push back, isn't it?
oh, definitely. And one of the things, I mean, the threat is real, if you ask me. And if somebody is threatening my country, I will never look at them the same way again.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people. I mean, this is actually one of the comments that I had in my videos that someone said that You know, once Trump is gone, everything's going to go back to normal, and we won't even think about this again. I disagree with that a lot because Trump is just, in my opinion, Trump is just a mouthpiece, but there is still the 77 million that voted for him that are not going anywhere. And moving forward, it's always been in the back of my mind. If I go to the US again in the future, if things relatively get back to normal, is this business owner or this restaurant that I'm going to, is the owner somebody that supported this 51st state rhetoric? And to me, that is always going to be in my head if I ever go to the US again is, am I supporting somebody that supported taking over my country? And I don't feel that, at least for me, it's easy for me. I'm just not going to go. And if I do have to go, whether it's for family or friends, I'm going to limit how much I spend. But at the same time as well, I don't think because of this rhetoric that is happening and because of the threats, I don't think the relationship between Canada and the US is going to be the same for a very long time.
No, I mean, and that's a very legitimate reaction, and I think shared by most Canadians, most anybody. If your family is threatened or your home is threatened by a neighbor, you never look at them the same way. Don't worry about it. I was just kidding. Or no, I guess I've changed my mind. I don't want to do that anymore. But you're always going to be looking over your shoulder at them as a result of that, and we're responding. And again, I think, like I say, Americans didn't know how to handle it, and some of them got really ticked off. And I mean the whole elbows up thing. That was Mike Myers on Saturday Night Live. Remember at the end of the show,
Mm-hmm.
and he just
Yep.
wore the Canada T-shirt, or one time it was a Canadian Tire T-shirt, I think it was. And it was like, hey, Canadians aren't like that. They're not supposed to be aggressively upset about stuff like that. They're passively aggressive, aren't they? That's what they do. And it was a side of Canadians, I think, that a lot of them hadn't seen. And I think that extends into the idea about some of the boycotts of products right now that are happening. And we're getting a lot of reaction to that too now, especially because they're starting to talk about trade again. And we've had, I know you've covered this on your podcast, a number of American politicians, some friendly, some maybe not so friendly, that are saying, look, guys, I'm sorry that, I get that you guys are upset, but you're costing American jobs here. You've really got to start coming back, or hey, you really got to start buying American liquor again. And they don't seem to get it. That look at when your president imposes tariffs on the steel industry and on softwood lumber and aluminum, he's costing Canadian jobs, which is one of the reasons why we're responding. I know that Mr. Greer, who's going to be the head negotiator for the states, was being questioned about this in Congress just a couple of days ago, and said we really want them to stop this boycott about American alcohol. Well, drop the tariffs.
Yeah.
It was your boss that started this whole thing by tariffing and really causing problems with our industries on this side of the border. And they don't seem to get that.
No.
We can do that, though, because we're America, but they don't like the fact that we push back. And I that's why I'm very concerned about the ongoing negotiations here right now. I'm not expecting everybody to all of a sudden start to understand what Canada's all about and maybe be a little more empathetic. But you would think that the political leaders would have some sense of that, wouldn't you?
I thought they would. I mean, the problem is that I'm going to use Governor Mills as an example. I mean, she is somebody that I felt in the beginning, really kind of understood. But there was a few interviews that she did with CBC, and basically she was saying that you guys with your boycott, you're not hurting Donald Trump. You're hurting your friends and family. I don't agree with that at all. I mean, it's something. It's like they're getting mad at us retaliating when they should be getting mad at the source, which is their president. So I don't feel that a lot of US government officials and even industry officials really understand that, hey, the problem isn't Canada. The problem is coming from your president, and you guys need to direct your energy not at Canada, but direct it at your president and the White House. I mean, that's how it's frustrating for me because I see these reports every day. I've listened to the gaslighting that's happening right now. And to be honest, it just makes me more, it just makes my boycott stronger every time I hear it.
Well, and because there are a couple of things that are going on here. And as you say, first of all, there could be a lack of information, and that's understandable given the scenario. But that kind of falls back again to something that we've talked about on the show many times is people don't absorb media these days, such as it is, whether it's social media, whether it's the traditional media, radio, television, or whatever. I think there's still a few newspapers still print too, but they don't listen, they don't watch, or they don't take that information in to try to inform themselves. What they do is they tap into it to basically to validate the feelings that they already have. In other words, if you're a Trump supporter, you're watching Fox News and only Fox News, maybe News Nation, but you're watching right-wing media that are only going to tell that side of the story. They don't tell you the other side. As a matter of fact, they usually denigrate the other side, and that validates your feeling already if you're a MAGA person. So you don't get that. There's no empathy about what's going on the other side. And conversely, I mean, if you're on the extreme left, you know there are media avenues that you'll follow there too. And it's creating a polarization right now that's really, I think, at the basis of what's going on here right now. It's not just that we don't understand what's going on, or we don't understand what they're saying or why. We don't care. Because we're so entrenched in our own beliefs right now that we don't want to hear anybody else's.
Yeah. And, I've been called left-wing media and a left-wing podcast by my haters. But, I'm not, when it comes to Canada, I mean, I would consider myself in the center. And for me, I don't talk about internal politics on my channel within Canada, because I focus on what the issue is south of the border. And, I have viewers that are liberal and also conservative and, for all parties. And they tell me that right now, some people want me to talk about politics, and I really refrain from it. But I have had emails saying, I'm a conservative supporter. I don't agree with the liberal policies, but I agree with your channel because, our country is being threatened, right? So when you're talking about left and right wing media, I try to stay in the center when it comes to delivering the message. And my main message on my channel is always about the boycott and what the US is doing to Canada. So I guess for me is trying to stay balanced, I guess, right? And
But
yeah.
what you're talking about, though, really, G, is what most Canadians are. I think, and I think historically this bears out, Canadians are a kind of middle of the road centrist. Sometimes center left, sometimes center right, and we usually elect a government that reflects that from time to time, which is why we have changes in our leadership. But I think we're most comfortable right there in the middle. We've always known that there are extreme groups on one side and the other, and that's fine. It's in democracy, and they're allowed to have those feelings. I guess what's troubling right now is there's those people, the extreme views seem to be getting more of a power base, and that's something that we need to address. But I think that's one of the reasons there's so much angst right now, is because we're noticing that comfort zone that we've had for generations now is no longer there, and we're not too sure just what's going to happen next as a result of that. I guess it's one of the things that kind of feeds into the frustration that we're feeling right now, and okay, who's going to do what next, and how's this going to roll out? And the fact that all of a sudden this nation that we lived beside, as long as we've been a country, certainly, for 100 years before that, and we were always best friends. We always work things out, like neighbors.
Mhm.
You might have a disagreement about this and that, and you don't run your lawnmower at 6:00 in the morning, for crying out loud, or hey, your kid tells the music, but you work it out, you get it out. And we were like that too. We had disagreements about things like the auto industry, but we found middle ground, and we signed deals, and same thing with lumber and steel and things like that. And it wasn't perfect, and there were always people that are going to be upset, but it was workable. Now I think a lot of us are looking at what's going on and saying, I don't know if we're going to get back to those days. It's and Prime Minister Carney's been pretty adamant about that. Those days are over. We have to find a new way to do things. And let's face it, human nature is such that fear of the unknown is one of the greatest fears. We don't know what's going to happen next. We don't know how this is going to pan out. So of course we're nervous about this.
One thing I've noticed as well, though, is that, you mentioned friendship, right? I mean, it's like their next door neighbor,
Yeah.
you think it's a two-way thing. But what I'm finding, and this is just my opinion, is that a lot of Canadians are now realizing that the relationship with the U.S. has always been a one-way thing. Um, we do a lot for the U.S., but have they done a lot for us in return? I don't think so. I mean, it's one of those things where, for everything that Canada has done for the U.S., I'll give some examples, like the Iran situation in the
Ken
80s,
Taylor, the
or
ambassador. Yeah.
yeah, or the 9/11 incident where all of our airports were basically taking in their citizens that were stranded. those are things that I feel that Canada did without any question, without any thing in return. If that were to happen and the roles were reversed, I don't feel confident that the U.S. would be supporting us the way that we supported them. So there's there's situations where I'm feeling, you know what? Would our neighbors down south support us if things were reversed? Like, if they were boycotting us, would 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 they still support us? Would they, would their citizens still support the Canadians that didn't support, us taking them over? Right? I'm just trying to reverse everything, and I don't feel. I also don't want to offend any U.S. viewers, but I just don't feel that they a majority of especially on the right, I know this for sure, but I just don't feel that they value the relationship that they have with Canada. It's always been a one-way thing, and we're just finding out now. All right, let me pause it here for a moment. What you're witnessing is my mumbling and stumbling that happens when I'm talking live. But what I was trying to get at is that Canadians are now realizing something very important. A lot of what we thought were two-way relationships and friendships with the US were actually just one way. A better example that I can actually give: if things had been reversed on 9/11 and Canada had closed its airspace, with planes destined for Canada suddenly stranded, would the United States have taken in those planes and treated Canadians and other passengers on board the same way we did in Gander, Vancouver, and all the other airports that stepped up? My gut tells me that everyone on those planes would have been treated as guilty before proven innocent. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's continue.
Well, Americans are proud to be Americans, and they talk to anybody, and it's one of the themes, I guess, on a lot of shows. The greatest country in the history of the world, et cetera, et cetera. We can disagree with that, but the reality is, there's an awful lot of people feel that way. Some of them, it's guarded optimism. I think they understand some of the realities that are going on. But you see that time and time again, and the Iran situation in 1979 was a classic example of that, where Ken Taylor and the Canadian embassy staff risked their lives to first of all hide those Americans and then to get them out of the country. And what, about 10 years ago, Ben Affleck makes a movie about it and doesn't even mention Canada at all. It's a movie crew from the United States that actually says, well, that was just it's untrue. It just didn't happen that way. I still recall, because it wounds our pride to think, hey, Canadians put their lives on the line for you guys. And you mentioned, 9/11. Of course, it will Come From Away, the play that was by a big hit on Broadway, by the way. So, they understood the story. But they don't recognize it to the extent that I guess, and maybe it's our Canadian attitude every now and then too, isn't it? Where once in a while you'd like to have somebody say, "Hey, thanks, for having our back." Yeah, we're the greatest nation on earth, the most powerful nation on earth, but sometimes, the world had to come to your rescue. And as you mentioned, 9/11, the only time that the world rescued, attack on one is attack on all, was after 9/11. It was the United States that everybody came to defend and help. We sent troops to Afghanistan, and other nations did at the same time. And it's not like, hey, we want a big thank you for all that, but at least an acknowledgement, hey, that, we're an ally and we're on your side. We may not be as big as you and as strong as you, but we're important in our own way. And I guess a lot of the time we're kind of figuring, hey, you don't understand. Maybe you take us for granted. Again, we're getting into the political realm where Trump and some of his allies are looking at this and simply saying, we want your precious minerals. We want your water. We want your softwood lumber to take it over. We want all the industry. Donald Trump says he wants all the autos, North America made in the United States. Well, it's not supposed to be that way. And it's a sign of disrespect, but at the same time, it's economically catastrophic for those sorts of things to happen. And no other president, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, in the history of our relationship has ever gone to that extreme. Like I say, we've had disagreements before, but there's been some modicum of respect anyway, mutual respect, that seems to be basically absent from the way things are going right now. And it's rather troubling to see. And don't you think every now and then, we just want to stop, and it's like that commercial where years ago, the Molson Canadian beer commercial, I am Canadian. We maybe don't do that often enough. But I remember a commercial, I think it was for the Super Bowl a few years ago. Dave Grohl, from a great musician, of course, from the Foo Fighters. It was about the Crown Royal, who, by the way, is in the news again, too, for another reason. But he was saying, here's a salute to Canada. Football was invented in Canada, not in the United States. He says, look it up. But baseball was invented at McGill University in Montreal. It was not invented by Abner Doubleday. Hockey certainly was. Basketball, Dr. James Naismith, and on and on and on. And the polio vaccine and the inhaler that we all use, people that have asthmatic problems, etc., developed by Canadians. And maybe we don't blow our horn often enough. And every now and then we have to stop and say, hey, we're making some huge contributions here, and we don't deserve this sort of disrespect. So I can imagine that you do reach a point, don't you, where you simply say, we got to push back here.
Yeah, we do have to push back, but I think in the grand scheme of things, that's just how we are as Canadians, right?
Sure.
We don't have to boast. We don't have to make big parades about things that we do, right? And that's for me is why I'm proud to be Canadian. And I don't have to like Trump when he has to have like a parade for his birthday. Would Mark Carney need to do that? No, right? And it's just something that Canadians we don't have to prove that, we are greater than anybody else, right? But you're right, just acknowledgement of even like a thank you of something that we've done for them, right? And one thing I do want to bring up is when the LA fires happened earlier this year, we sent our water bombers down and, our firefighters and everything. What did the US do when Manitoba had fires? They basically complained that Canada's got to get their shit together because the smoke is ruining their summer. That told me it's like, okay, we helped you to put out your fires in LA. When Manitoba was on fire, you basically bitched and complained and said, hey, your smoke is ruining our summers, and you guys need to get your stuff in order, right? And that kind of showed me, okay, this is a one-way relationship, and this is coming from, I think it was 6 different senators in the border states. So it's not like it's coming from, well, I guess they are the MAGA supporters, but it was just tone deaf, if you ask me. And it's just kind of, there's a lot more of these kind of small scenarios coming up now.
So with the new reality, and I agree, by the way, with your assessment. If Donald Trump were to leave tomorrow, or to lose the next election, if there is even going to be a next election, MAGA is not going to go away. There's a different mindset that's going on. And we call, Trump MAGA, we think is synonymous, and I can understand that sort of an assessment. But this mindset started long before Trump came along. I mean, he certainly fed into it. And it's because it's a different kind of politics right now. And we see this, some of the stories you've been talking about on your podcast. Some of the border regulations that are going into this idea about, if you want to go across there right now, you have to make your digital media history available to them the last 5 years. And they could actually, refuse entry with this kind of stuff. I was in politics and did talk radio for a number of years. They wouldn't need 5 years. They probably need about 15 minutes of my history. And they would say, you're not coming over. And that's fine. But that's because in this country, we kind of believe in free speech. And that may mean at some point that you're being critical of the government. And that's something that they're not very comfortable with. But these sorts of restrictions all of a sudden, we're as Canadians thinking that, hey, what are you doing to us? Why are you looking at us as potential enemies here? Because we're not. We're nobody's enemy. We're on the right side here. We're the good guys. We wear the white hats. And I think we are kind of shocked and now just a little bit angry that we're being lumped in, but like what's going on with the world these days, I guess, G? The good guys are the bad guys and the bad guys have become the good guys. All of a sudden Vladimir Putin's a good guy to at least the president of the United States anyway. And countries like Canada and the UK and even Ukraine seem to be the bad guys. And how do you deal with something like that? It's no wonder we're wondering what's going to happen next.
Well, you know what? Every day I wake up, I look at my phone and see if there's anything else that's like outrageous, right? Because when I saw that social media requirement, I was just like, okay, you're just going to kill your tourism industry. Nobody is going to want to be sharing 5 years of their social media history, their emails, their phone numbers, and contacts of their family. I mean, that just reinforces my reasoning on why I choose to stay anonymous is because obviously if I cross the border, and they know me as Guard the Leaf, they're going to know that I'm very critical of their administration, and I am sure that would cause me problems on my my trip down to the States. But you're right. I mean, I sometimes just have to sit back and think like, what the hell is going on, right? Like, how did we go from being the largest undefended border to now not wanting to cross that border at all?
It's
Yeah.
it's a different world. We understand that, and I guess it's very difficult for us to try to get our heads around that and wonder just what's going to happen next, especially when there has been this sense of cooperation that's gone back and forth. But we've just touched on, I think, one of the most sensitive spots here, and that is the idea of free speech. And we see what's going on in the States now. I don't want to get too deeply into the ICE thing and everything. People are getting rounded up on the streets down there, and we're very fearful about that sort of thing spreading. But what it does is creates this sense of unease and the lack of free speech. In this country, we're still allowed to criticize the government. That's what I've done for years and years. And by criticize, I mean critique. You look for the good, the bad, and the ugly. You throw bouquets when they deserve them, throw bricks, they're absolutely necessary and when it's earned too. That's always been the way things have been. Politicians, and there have been some pretty polarizing politicians even in U.S. history over the life, from Lyndon Johnson and others. They always had recognized and acknowledged the fact that the media's got a place to play here. And sometimes they're going to say things that you don't like as a political leader. And you just got to suck it up and take it. That's what democracy is all about. And Johnson even wrote a letter. I'm sure you saw this story. Smothers Brothers, of course, who had that great show back in the late 1960s. And they were very critical of the U.S. administration because of the Vietnam War and some of the things that were going on. Very, very critical, where sponsors were, dropping out and everything else. But Johnson wrote a letter to them and said, look, I disagree with what you're doing. I don't like what you're saying about me, but this is America. This is a democracy, and that's your job, and this is my job. And elected officials seem to have gotten away from that. Certainly Trump has. And it just seems as if all of a sudden they figure, you know what, we're Teflon. You're not allowed to say anything negative about us. And that scares me, because all of a sudden it starts to remind me of some of the totalitarian countries that we heard about, the people that were getting locked up without trials and things like this nature. Well, that's never going to happen over here. And I think a lot of us are very concerned now. It's happening. It's not, it might happen. It's starting to happen. And again, we go back to that out mindset about, well, what's next? What's the next, did you ever think that they were going to say, you want to go across the border? I'm in Southern Ontario. You want to go across to a Bills game, or do you want to go spend a week down in, and we're city people. We love to go to places like New York and Chicago. I'm not a beach guy, but see the sights, and so, the Broadway plays, or go to a game at Comiskey Park down in Chicago or something. And now all of a sudden I have to show them, my digital history before they let me across the border. What's going on?
Yeah.
Where are your papers? How many times have you seen that? Where the spy is trying to get back into the good side, from the communist country or wherever it is, the totalitarian. They've got to get past that border, and you've got your papers, and there's that tense moment where they're going to get past. That's happening here now, and that's pretty frightful.
Yeah. You know what actually scares me? I mean, the fact that in the past, I've been pulled into secondary because I have the same name as somebody. Thankfully, back then, it was just fine. I got out in 15 minutes or whatever it was. Now that they're so strict and, all of these new rules are in place, it's in the back of my mind that, hey, if I go to the US and let's say, for example, I go to California somewhere, right? What's stopping them now from going back to that person that has the same name as me and, targeting me again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's stuff that I never thought I would have to think about, right? And obviously, for me, it's easy. I just don't go. It is going to be a risk for those Canadians and even international tourists that still decide to go, because you just don't know what's going to be next, right? Social media was the last big thing that they announced. Who knows? Next, it could be they need your DNA or something like that before you can get into the country, right? I just don't know what's going to be next, but it mind boggles me that we're not even a year into his presidency, and this is how much damage has been done already.
Where's this all going to go? I mean, we're Canadians, so we're, I think, inherently optimistic that, this will pass, and we're going to finally find some sense of normalcy, whatever that new normal may be. I think we can pretty much all acknowledge that we're not going back to the way things were, but we need to find some stability and some middle ground, and I'm not quite sure where that's going to be. And I'm not just referring to economics with tariffs and everything. I'm talking about the mindset between these two countries.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, there always used to be this relationship that, we could always get along and be, whether it's going down to Arizona or going down to Florida for a couple of months, or down to Disney World, or whatever the case may be, and we just don't do that anymore. And by the way, we should clarify, because I know that Mr. Greer, who's being the negotiator, was talking about the ban on travel. There is no ban on travel. It's Canadians deciding not to go. No government is saying you can't go across the border.
Right.
They may encourage you not to for a variety of reasons. But if you want to go, as you say, I remember watching, as the Jays were doing their World Series run toward the end of the season, there'd be a game in Cleveland, and there's a bunch of people there from, Blue Jay shirts, and I figured, well, they shouldn't be going across. I said they probably bought the tickets a year ago, like as you were referring to earlier. So you're supposed to say no, just eat the cost. I can get that, okay, but that because that's the way things should be, and so you can't just condemn people for this. But are we ever going to get back to this sense where we start trusting each other again? And I mean across the border, because right now that trust is tenuous at best.
Yeah. I mean, I speak for myself when I say this. I don't think it will go back to normal for me. Like I said before, if there is a Democratic president, things start to kind of somewhat go back to normal. I'm still probably going to refrain from going because I know there's a lot more places in the world to visit, and especially with me being overseas right now, I can travel to Singapore or Indonesia or Thailand, within a few hours flights. What I've always been trying to encourage my viewers is that we're so used to flying to the US because of proximity, right? It takes me 2.5 hours to go to Las Vegas, or maybe just under 3 hours to go to LA, or I think it's 5 or 6 hours to Hawaii. But that was, I frequented those places because it was easy for me to go to. Now my mindset has changed. It's like, you know what? There's a lot more out there. And, Europe is a place that I have not explored. And I encourage a lot of Canadians that, hey, stop doing the trips that are convenient. Start doing trips that are, go to countries that would actually value you instead of interrogate you. So I don't think things will go back to normal. I think a lot of Canadians, I'm just taking this from the feedback I'm getting on my channel, is that a lot of Canadians are done and they're already starting to make different arrangements. I did a video I think back in July, where it was really about my viewers. And I listed out a whole bunch of screenshots on comments from my viewers stating that I was supposed to go to, I'm just using random cities, but they would say like, I was supposed to go to Florida. Normally we spend $15,000 in Florida for 4 people. We're now going to Europe, or we're now going to Australia, or wherever else, right? That tells me that Canadians they're done. And, they're already starting to make it a habit of not going to the US. And, I've been corrected a few times on my channel where they say, hey, it's not a boycott anymore. It's just a new way of life. So, I think, when it comes to buying, spending, those that are boycotting, they've already gone through that phase where it's no longer, they don't have to remind themselves to boycott. It's now a habit. And same with travel as well. Whereas if they were snowbirds going to Florida, they might be snowbirds going to Portugal or Spain now. And, I feel that once people make that change, it's going to be very hard to go back to the US. Especially, there's so many different reminders on why we shouldn't be going to the US, right? And even after Trump is gone, those reminders are still going to be there.
And I understand that there still has to be some sort of a relationship, like our steel industry is hurting. Mm-hmm. Aluminum, softwood lumber, and things of this nature. And it was gratifying, actually, to see some of the people that were making those presentations to that congressional committee, American businesses. They were saying, we need Canada. I know Donald Trump says we don't need their lumber. They said, yeah, we do. Yeah, we need them at the Ottawa. We do. Canada is necessary, a partner with this. So they seem to understand that. And what frustrates me is during Trump's first term, don't forget, he's tried to do this tariff thing then, too. And we pushed back, there was an alcohol thing. We didn't take that off the shelves, but there was an extra chair. And they gave in after a couple of months. The American people in those jurisdictions complained so much that there were enough people in the White House that said, Mr. President, you got to back off. And he did. He's surrounded himself with sycophants right now, so that's not going to happen. But, this is one of the reasons why. I guess if there's a silver lining, and maybe that's too extravagant a term here, it's opened our eyes to other possibilities, hasn't it?
Oh,
and not necessarily to go to Europe as an example. Maybe travel across Canada. If Southern Ontario, have you actually crossed the mountains? Have you crossed the Rockies? Have you been to Vancouver? Have you been to other places? Have you seen Alberta? Have you been to Newfoundland? No, I never thought of that. We should do that sometime. Well, I think a lot of Canadians are saying, stop talking about it. Let's do it. Let's go to Halifax for our summer vacation instead of down to Boston or some other place like that. And all of a sudden, I think we're saying, hey, this is pretty good. Or
Hmm.
same thing with Canadian products. I mean, the buy Canadian thing is always something we've said, yeah, we should buy Canadian, but it was easy not to. There's the easiest thing on the shelf there, and it's made in Wisconsin. Well, so what's the big deal? We're friends anyway. Now we're buying Canadian, and all of a sudden, that's starting to boost our Canadian economy. Canadian businesses are starting to see the net benefit of that too. And you're right. Even if things do change, and we hope they do for the better, we've changed our buying habits and we've changed our travel habits. And I don't know that too many Canadians are going to say, "Oh, let's just go back the other way now." We're kind of comfortable with this. We're kind of comfortable spending our tourism dollars in Canada, buying Canadian products instead of products from America, as a matter of fact. And it's one of these things we've always promised ourselves we were going to do, and this has kind of forced us into that. And that's not really a bad thing.
Yeah. I'll go back to the travel thing you just mentioned. I mean, there's been so many people emailing me that, they've always gone to the U.S. And I guess with my channel, and with the comments of Canadians from all over Canada, people have been emailing me saying, "Hey, I've been to your city for the first time. I've never been to Vancouver and I loved it." And the other way around as well is that even my parents, I had them, I suggested to them, "Hey, you guys have never explored Eastern Canada. Why don't you go there this year?" Right. So they did a trip. They visited Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, the Maritimes, everywhere, and they had a blast. It's something that they probably would have never considered before because they were so comfortable with Hawaii or the eastern or no, the western side of the U.S. So that's just one example, and there's probably thousands, if not millions, of different examples from Canadians just alternating their buying habits or even their travel habits, right? And they mentioned in one of my videos before. Now that I'm based in Malaysia, I went on a walk last week and there's a lot of tourists here. And there's a lot of tourists that are here that may not have been if it weren't for Trump. So there was a Canadian couple that I just randomly saw. And, I heard their accent. I was like, "Where are you from?" Right. And they're like, "Oh, we're from Canada." And I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. I'm from Canada as well." Right. And we talked a little bit about what was going on back home. And, the guy actually mentioned, he's like, "Yeah, we actually would not have been considered a Southeast Asia trip if Trump wasn't in the office." So that tells me Canadians are broadening their experience and their travel, where they want to go. But it might be a longer flight, but if you ask me, it's worth it.
And and again, I cherish our American viewers too, and I know you do with the people that follow you on a consistent basis on Guard the Leaf. And at some point, things are going to change. And I'm a big fan. I love Boston, love New York, as I mentioned, some of those American cities that we've traveled to. And there will come a time when Canadians are going to say, "Yeah, let's do that again." But Americans, just to kind of bring this full circle, they have to understand that the reason Canadians are making this decision is because we're being hurt by the decisions your politicians are making right now. And I heard from somebody just a couple of months ago now, in Southern Ontario, from Buffalo, that said, what's the matter? Come on, we come over. You're hurting our businesses, our tourism business. I said, look, the people that live next door to me were in the steel industry. That guy's lost his job. Okay. That's how much that's the human reaction. This guy can't travel anywhere right now because he just lost a paycheck. And it's because of tariffs. Get rid of the tariffs, and all of a sudden, a lot of these things that you're complaining about, the Americans are complaining about, the boycott against alcohol and things of this nature, those go away. The
Hmm.
bitter feelings may not go away immediately, if at all,
Hmm.
but that may dissipate. But the immediate benefit to simply say, drop that stuff and we can get on with this and stop this silliness, then travel will increase. People from Southern Ontario will be heading out to New York to go shopping or to visit, some of the places. And people in Vancouver will be heading down to Seattle or down the coast to LA during the summertime or whatever the case may be. That'll happen again. But it's not until all of a sudden the precarious position that we're in right now because of these tariffs that the president is imposing on us. And I still think they're illegal tariffs, by the way, but that's
Hmm.
something the Supreme Court would have to decide on. But when those go away, a lot of the bad feelings and the hardships is going to start going away. I don't know that we're ever going to get back to, quote unquote, that normal, but there'll be some sense of normal. And maybe over time, I don't know if the wounds are going to heal, but at least they will heal enough that we can actually have some mutual respect again. Because right now, I think that's one of the biggest victims of all this right now. And it all comes back to that one element. We've had presidents that weren't crazy about us, and we've had presidents that don't like our prime ministers and vice versa. And there's a long history of that, Nixon didn't like, Pierre Trudeau, and, the relationship between Bush and some of these. So that's fine. But it never got to the point where all of a sudden, okay, we're going to be punitive to that country as a result. So, the whole thing here is let's let smarter heads, not just the cooler heads, but intelligent conversation about this in Washington and in Ottawa. And I'm confident in our prime minister. I like what this guy's doing, the time he's been in office, and I like the approach he's taking to this. And here's hoping that, there's an adult approach on the other side of the table too. I'd love to. I want to have you back on the show a lot, but I hope we have that conversation, do a show pretty soon about, boy, remember those days when things really sucked between the two countries? Boy, that's a thing of the past right now. We're not there yet, though, are we?
No, definitely not. And that's going to take a long time, if you ask me. I agree. I'm on the economic level. I think everything will get back to normal, maybe down the road. I don't know how long it's going to take, right? And there will be citizens that will go back to the U.S. just kind of, whether it's to visit family or just to visit the tourist destinations, whatever else. But I feel that a lot of Canadians are going to be very cautious when they go down in a sense where, we're not going to forget what's happening right now. And my guess is that, a decade down the road or something like that, or maybe 5 or 10 years or after Trump is gone, things will slowly start to kind of get back to somewhat normal. But Canadians won't forget the disrespect that we've gotten. And it's not just from the president, but it's also from the citizens in the U.S. as well. Not all citizens, but, obviously the Trump supporters, the ones that will still continue, saying the 51st rhetoric long after Trump is gone, right? So we'll remember that. And, hopefully things get back to normal. But like I said, I for me personally, and I speak for myself, I'm always going to remember 2025 and what's happened. So.
Exactly. That's going to be burned in our brains. But we are, I think, as Canadians, inherently optimistic, and we have to, I guess, let that be our guiding light. We just have to water it down a little bit with some pragmatism at the same time, though. I think that's the element to this. It was a pleasure having you on the program today. Thank you so much for the time. I remind our viewers, of course, that if you haven't already, subscribe to Guard the Leaf. It's a great podcast and gives you some great insights about some of the things that we've been talking about relationships between our two countries. And geographically, we're all still going to be joined at the border here, okay, one way or another. We're like Siamese twins, so we're going to be here, so we have to learn to coexist. And we need to, as we've talked about on our show, and I know as you have on yours, one of the best ways to create that and to tear down those walls is educated and informed opinion. And you certainly have been a catalyst for that with your podcast. And we're so glad that you could join us today and be on ours.
Oh, thanks very much, Bill. And I've been really looking forward to this for a very long time. And I do want to thank you for, acknowledging me, right? Because when I first started my channel, I really did not know what I was doing. Or I really didn't know what I was doing, but you were one of the first channels that actually acknowledged that I am, doing something positive for Canada. So I really appreciate that shout out. And for my viewers as well, if you're not subscribed to Bill Kelly, subscribe to him. He gives a lot of great information, not just on the tourism side and boycott, but also the economics and politics as well. So subscribe to Bill. Tell him I sent you.
It's a time for fellowship and good nature, I guess, between peoples. Of course, we're into a holiday season, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas time coming up. So best of the holiday season to you and yours. And let's do this again real soon, okay?
For sure, Bill.
Thanks again, G. Take care.
I really recommend that you subscribe to the Bill Kelly podcast. I'll leave a link to his channel in the description below. We also talked about doing another round together in the future, so I'll be sure to let everyone know once that one is scheduled. That's it for today's video. If you're still watching here to the end, I really appreciate the support from my channel, and I really hope you enjoyed the discussion. And thank you for staying to the end as well, because it does genuinely help the algorithm push this video out to a bigger audience. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.